Sometimes it is not the words themselves that hurt. It is the silence that follows after you've accepted them. There are things a man can say that do not merely hurt in the moment, but fracture your relationship with yourself. Words spoken carelessly or with quiet intention can leave invisible bruises. You don't see them, but you feel them, especially in the way you begin to second-guess yourself. Your sleep is disturbed, your body tightens, and a once vibrant connection begins to feel like survival. But this is not about judging another. It is about seeing clearly. It is about honoring your inner energy, the frequency that alerts you when something is misaligned, even before the mind has words to explain it. This talk is not a warning. It is a practice in awareness. Because in relationships, what you allow continues. And what you recognize early saves you later. Let us begin. When we hear someone speak, our attention is naturally drawn to the words themselves. What is being said, how it sounds, what meaning it carries. But for the one who has cultivated inner silence, there is a deeper listening. A listening that moves beyond language into tone, rhythm, and vibration. In relationships, especially those of emotional closeness, it becomes essential to listen, not merely for information, but for patterns. Because a man's words, even when casual or seemingly insignificant, often reveal his deepest internal architecture, his fears, his beliefs, his hidden intentions. It is easy to be swayed by charm. It is easy to be drawn to confidence cloaked in eloquence. But there is something more important than charisma, consistency. Words are windows into someone's inner world. And when a man speaks repeatedly in a way that disregards your needs, mocks your sensitivity, or constantly repositions himself as the center of every conversation, it is not the words that are the problem. It is the emotional blueprint behind them. Consider the phrase, "You're too sensitive." On the surface, it might sound like a harmless comment. It may even be delivered with a laugh. But when such words are repeated, especially after you've expressed discomfort or pain, they are no longer casual. They become a tool to reframe your reality, a subtle attempt to tell you that your emotional truth is invalid. And once that seed is planted, doubt begins to grow, not in the man who said it, but in the woman who received it. A woman, when deeply connected to her intuition, will feel the tension in her chest when such words are spoken. She will feel her breath shorten, even if she smiles to keep the peace. Her body registers a disturbance long before her mind finds the courage to question it. This is because the nervous system is not swayed by logic or excuses. It responds to vibration, to energy, to what feels safe or unsafe. It is not about being too sensitive. It is about being finely tuned. Neuroscience reveals that our brains are designed to detect threat through tone of voice, facial expressions, and subtle changes in body language. We are constantly scanning for cues. Is this person safe? Is this interaction building connection or eroding it? And when a man speaks words that consistently place blame, deflect responsibility, or ridicule emotional expression, the nervous system reacts as if it were being physically threatened. The response may be silent, but it is powerful. Increased cortisol, tightened muscles, interrupted sleep, and a growing sense of emotional withdrawal. In relationships, the words that are most dangerous are often the ones that are not shouted. They are whispered in moments of vulnerability. They are said when your guard is down. You always overthink everything. So, why do you have to make a big deal out of nothing? These phrases are not about you. They are a reflection of someone who is unwilling or unable to hold space for emotional complexity. They reflect a fear of depth, a discomfort with presence, and more importantly, a lack of capacity to engage in emotional reciprocity. Emotional safety is not built by words alone, but words are the doorway. When a man consistently uses language that diminishes your inner world, it is a sign that he is not yet connected to his own. And a person disconnected from his own emotions will always invalidate yours. Not because he wants to harm you, but because your depth threatens his numbness. Your awareness highlights his denial. And so the words come, not to connect, but to control. There is a story of a woman who sat across the dinner table from her partner every night, listening. He would speak of work, of politics, of people he admired. But when she tried to share her day, her inner experiences, he would nod, distracted. And then one evening, he said with a sigh, "Why do you always make things so emotional? Can't we just have a normal conversation?" It was in that moment she realized he was never really listening. He was only tolerating her presence, not honoring her being. And this realization didn't come from one cruel insult or a loud argument. It came from the slow erosion of feeling seen, the quiet dismissal of her emotional truth. This is how words reveal inner patterns, not by their volume, but by their repetition. Not by how dramatic they are, but by how subtly they reshape the dynamic between two people. Every time your experience is invalidated, you learn to speak less. Every time your truth is minimized, you shrink a little more. And soon you are not in a relationship. You are surviving one. Psychologists often refer to this as gaslighting, a term that describes the slow manipulation of someone's perception of reality. But long before the term was coined, ancient traditions already spoke of this. In Eastern philosophy, the concept of right speech is fundamental. It emphasizes speech that is honest, compassionate, and unifying. When someone speaks in a way that consistently divides, creates distance instead of closeness, it is not right speech. It is emotional noise disguised as communication. But perhaps even more revealing than the words themselves is the energy behind them. You see, the human body is an energetic instrument. It absorbs frequency, mirrors emotion, and echoes intention. This is why two people can say the same sentence, but only one makes your stomach twist. It is not the sentence. It is the charge behind it. Imagine this: a man says, "You're lucky to have me." DOS. If spoken with light-hearted affection, in a moment of mutual joy, it might land playfully. But if spoken after a disagreement, or when you voice your concerns, it carries a very different weight. In such cases, it is not a compliment. It is a declaration of dominance, a reminder of perceived power. And this is where energy begins to speak louder than words. Everything in life is energy. Every word carries a vibration, and in intimate relationships, this vibration shapes your emotional environment. You may not realize it, but your body is constantly adjusting to the emotional temperature set by another's tone. If a man frequently speaks from a place of superiority, impatience, or subtle disdain, your body begins to respond with quiet defense. Your shoulders tighten, your breathing shallows, your trust retracts, and yet we often ignore these signals. We excuse them. He's just stressed. Wow, he didn't mean it. Or I'm being too sensitive again. But what if sensitivity is not the problem? What if sensitivity is the wisdom of your body telling you that something is misaligned? The problem is not feeling too much. The problem is ignoring what you feel. In neurobiology, there is a concept called S-neuroception, the brain's ability to detect safety or danger in relationships without conscious awareness. This is what allows us to feel when someone is not being genuine, even if they smile. It is why you can feel drained after certain conversations, even when they seem normal on the surface. Your body is intelligent. It speaks through tension, fatigue, withdrawal. It keeps records not only of trauma, but of every subtle dishonoring. Now, pause for a moment and reflect when was the last time someone said something to you that felt wrong, not because it was loud or cruel, but because it simply didn't match your truth. Perhaps it was a dismissive comment about your dreams. Perhaps it was a joke made at your expense in front of others. Perhaps it was silence when you needed reassurance. These are not small things. They are signals, and in a healthy relationship, such signals are met with curiosity and correction, not justification. Emotional attunement is the ability to sense, respond to, and respect the emotional states of another. In romantic connection, it is the foundation of intimacy. Without it, words become tools of manipulation instead of bridges of understanding. And when a man consistently fails to attune to your emotional reality, when his words bypass your experience to protect his ego, he is not protecting the relationship. He is protecting himself from growth. Growth requires confrontation, not of the other, but of the self. A man who is truly grounded, truly conscious, will not be afraid of emotional depth. He will not use words to escape. He will use them to expand understanding. He will say, tell me more, asap. Help me understand what you feel. Sis, I didn't know that hurt you. Thank you for telling me. These words are not weak. They are courageous. They are the words of someone who values connection over control. In contrast, the man who says, you're too much, or you're imagining things, is not commenting on your character. He is revealing his own limits. He is saying, I cannot hold what you bring. And that is not a failure on your part. That is clarity. The purpose of listening deeply to a man's words is not to judge him, but to discern whether his internal world can coexist with yours. If his energy constantly tightens your chest, if his language routinely makes you question your worth, then your body has already given you the answer. Because in the end, safety is not just physical, it is emotional, spiritual, and energetic. It is the ability to be yourself without fear of ridicule. It is the ability to speak your truth without being silenced. And when that is missing, no matter how beautiful the exterior, the foundation is unstable. The man who values you will choose his words with presence. He will understand that each word is an offering, an imprint on your soul, and he will be careful not because he fears your reaction, but because he respects your being. We often think of boundaries as walls, as barriers to protect ourselves. But boundaries begin with language, with knowing which words support your growth and which ones shrink your spirit. And when someone repeatedly speaks in a way that dishonors you, the most powerful boundary is not an argument. It is distance. To walk away from such energy is not rejection. It is reverence. Reverence for your peace. Reverence for your body's wisdom. Reverence for the life you are here to live fully, not half-heartedly. The moment you choose alignment over approval, you begin to walk the path of self-mastery. Not through resistance, but through remembrance of what you deserve and what you will no longer tolerate. Because the words a man speaks are never just about him. They are the mirrors that show you where you are headed. And if the path is paved with blame, dismissal, and control, then the direction is clear. You do not need to fix it. You only need to see it clearly, calmly, completely. And when you see it, truly see it, you will know what to do. There are certain things a man can say to a woman that don't merely sting for a moment. They slowly disassemble the very architecture of trust, confidence, and safety within the relationship. And often, these words are not violent, not loud, not even said in anger. They are quiet dismissals, subtle devaluations, veiled remarks that wear the face of humor or honesty, but carry with them the force of erosion. In the early days, they might be brushed off, laughed away, excused as quirks or moods or moments of stress. But if not recognized for what they are, these seemingly small statements grow roots. They become patterns, and soon they shape the dynamic in ways the mind cannot fully trace, but the heart unmistakably feels. Disrespect does not always come dressed in cruelty. Sometimes it arrives clothed in logic, laced with calmness, disguised as advice or concern. When a man says, "You're lucky I put up with this," or "Any other man would have left you by now," he is not giving feedback. He is issuing a warning, one that says your worth is conditional, that your presence is tolerated rather than cherished. And if you stay silent in the face of such statements, you begin to digest them. You begin to believe that love must be earned by shrinking, by appeasing, by bending your truth until it no longer resembles who you are. Psychology has long explored the mechanisms of emotional abuse, but beyond the terminology lies a deeper, more human truth. Words are power. And when someone uses them to belittle, shame, or devalue, they are not just expressing opinion, they are trying to reshape your self-image. This is not miscommunication. This is not a difference in perspective. This is a signal that something in the relationship is not rooted in mutual respect, but in control. Eastern philosophy teaches that clarity precedes peace. Without clarity, one tolerates chaos in the name of love. But when we become clear about what is respectful, what is supportive, and what is sacred, then peace is not something we chase. It becomes the natural state of our relationships. And clarity begins with awareness. To notice not only how someone treats you in public, but how they speak to you in moments of frustration, in vulnerability, in private, when no one else is listening. There was once a woman, strong on the outside, independent in her work, admired by her friends. And yet, every evening, she returned home to a man who had learned how to use words like weapons. Silent weapons that did not bruise the skin, but wounded her inner knowing. When she spoke of her needs, he'd reply, "You're just being dramatic again." When she succeeded in her work, he'd say, "Let's see how long you can keep that up." And when she finally confronted him with trembling hands about how his words made her feel, he looked her straight in the eye and said, "You always twist everything. You're impossible to talk to." And in that moment, she doubted herself more than ever. This is how disrespect operates, not as a single event, but as a slow, cumulative distortion of your perception. It tells you that your emotions are flawed, that your needs are excessive, that your expectations are unreasonable. And if repeated long enough, you start adjusting, not the relationship, but yourself. You begin to walk on eggshells. You rehearse your words before speaking. You apologize for feeling, and your spirit, once vibrant, grows quiet. But true connection cannot thrive in the presence of disguised contempt. A man who cannot respect your boundaries, who turns your voice into a problem to be solved rather than a truth to be held, is not engaging in love. He is engaging in defense, not of the relationship, but of his ego. Because to truly love someone means to witness them without needing to minimize their reality. In every relationship, conflict will arise, but how that conflict is handled reveals everything. The difference between growth and destruction is not the presence of disagreement, but the quality of dialogue. When someone responds to your pain by saying, "You're too emotional," what they are really saying is, "I don't want to feel responsible for how my actions affect you." And that is not partnership. That is avoidance. Neuroscience confirms what ancient wisdom has always known: the nervous system is shaped by repeated interaction. If your partner's words consistently make you feel unsafe, unsure, or unworthy, then your body will eventually adapt by shutting down emotional expression altogether. You'll find yourself quiet in moments you used to speak. You'll say, "Oh, it's okay," even when it's not. You'll begin to edit yourself to fit within the emotional limitations of the one who cannot meet you where you are. And yet, this adaptation is praised in society. It is called compromise. But compromise without clarity becomes self-abandonment. And when a man continually uses language to assert dominance, superiority, or conditional acceptance, the wisest thing you can do is not to explain, not to negotiate, not to educate, but to observe. And once the pattern becomes clear, the next step is not to wait for change, but to honor your truth. Disrespect is not a phase. It is not something that improves with time. It is a symptom of deeper misalignment, one that no amount of patience or effort can heal if it is not recognized and addressed at the root. The body always knows. Long before the mind admits what is happening, the body sends signals. A tight stomach during conversations. Shallow breath when you anticipate his reaction. A constant loop of overthinking after every interaction. These are not random sensations. They are messengers. The nervous system speaks in sensation. And when the words you hear consistently create contraction, it is a sign that your body does not feel safe. This brings us into a deeper understanding of how inner biology influences relational awareness. In moments of perceived threat, whether physical or emotional, the autonomic nervous system activates protective responses. Fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. In toxic dynamics, it is often the fawn response that arises appeasement. You try harder to be agreeable. You minimize your needs to avoid conflict. You mold yourself into a version you hope will be more acceptable. But this is not peace. It is survival disguised as harmony. The danger lies in how normalized this becomes. Over time, your inner compass becomes quiet. You stop trusting your sensations. You rationalize what feels wrong. And this is where emotional numbness begins. Not because you don't feel, but because feeling became too costly, too dangerous. And yet, numbness is not the answer. Reconnecting to your emotional truth is, there is a story from ancient times of a woman who lived near the sea. She spent her days gathering herbs, speaking to the wind and watching the tides. One day, a man arrived, strong, charming, persuasive. He promised her safety, stability, a home that would protect her from the storms. She followed him inland, far from the sea, far from her rhythm. At first, she was grateful, but with time, she grew restless. Her skin missed the salt, her breath missed the wind. And one morning, he said to her, "Why are you never satisfied?" She looked at him, not with anger, but with realization. It wasn't dissatisfaction, it was misplacement. She had traded her natural rhythm for his version of safety, and the cost was her soul. This is what happens when we ignore the voice of our nervous system, when we interpret tension as love, when we call suppression maturity. The inner body always knows where it belongs, and when it is constantly in a state of vigilance, something is deeply misaligned. Emotional safety is not just a concept. It is a physiological state. It is the difference between relaxing into someone's presence and feeling the need to constantly manage it. And the words a man uses, over time, are either creating that safety or disrupting it. When a man responds to your boundaries with anger, when he mocks your emotions, when he uses your vulnerabilities against you, this is not emotional immaturity. This is emotional aggression. It may be wrapped in sarcasm, in stillness, in calculated silence, but its impact is no less damaging, because words, when used with the intent to confuse or control, bypass logic and go straight into the nervous system. They bypass reasoning and imprint as fear. The man who truly cares for you will notice your breath when you speak. He will pay attention not just to your words, but to the energy behind them, and he will never use your sensitivity as a weapon, because he knows sensitivity is not weakness. It is the language of the soul, and the soul is where real love speaks, The body's response is the most honest feedback you will ever receive in a relationship. More honest than promises, more accurate than apologies, more consistent than any declaration of love. When your body contracts every time he raises his voice, that is not a phase. When your stomach aches after every argument, that is not coincidence. When you find yourself dissociating during intimacy, that is not normal. These are signs, and the most dangerous thing you can do is to silence them, because silence does not mean healing. It means suppression, and suppressed truths always return, either as illness, as breakdown, or as awakening. The path of awakening often begins with a simple moment, a sentence, a look, a final straw. The nervous system says, no more. And if you listen, truly listen, you will hear the body saying, it's time. Time to realign. Time to return. Time to choose not what looks good, not what is convenient, but what is true. You were not born to endure disrespect disguised as passion. You were not made to carry someone else's emotional wounds as your responsibility. You are not here to fix what someone else refuses to see. You are here to live fully, to love deeply, and to be met at the same depth with honesty, respect, and reverence. And if the words spoken to you are repeatedly stripping away your worth, silencing your intuition, or shaking your inner stillness, then your body is already walking away, even if your feet have not moved. Listen to that wisdom. Listen not only with your ears, but with your whole being, because in the end, it is not just what is said that matters. It is how it makes you feel, how it shapes your breath, how it alters your self-concept. And if a man's words leave you confused, diminished, or constantly on edge, you do not need to explain why you feel what you feel. You only need to trust that you feel it. There is no argument stronger than embodied truth, no justification more sacred than your peace, and no relationship worth sacrificing your clarity for. When words are used as weapons, let your boundaries become your sanctuary. When your nervous system tightens, let it be the compass that leads you back, not to comfort, but to truth. Peace is not the absence of conflict. It is not found in pretending everything is fine when it is not. True peace, especially within a relationship, is born from clarity, inner alignment, and the ability to recognize what serves your growth and what stifles your spirit. In this way, peace is an expression of self-respect, and self-respect cannot exist where boundaries are absent. Yet so often, boundaries are misunderstood. They are mistaken for rejection, for coldness, or for selfishness. But boundaries are not walls. They are invitations, clear invitations to meet each other in truth, with presence, with maturity. A man who constantly pushes your limits, who speaks with disregard, who jokes about your insecurities under the guise of playfulness. Such a man is not confused about your boundaries. He is testing the absence of them. And every time you allow it, every time you ignore the contraction in your chest or the sharpness behind his words, you are not being understanding. You are teaching him how to treat you. The patterns we accept become the treatment we receive. In many relationships, especially those built on strong chemistry or deep emotional history, the idea of boundaries can feel threatening. There is a fear. If I speak my truth, he might leave. But silence never prevents loss, it only delays it. And in the meantime, it begins to cost you your joy, your vitality, your trust in yourself. A woman who suppresses her voice to keep a man by her side may keep his body near, but his soul will remain untouched, because real intimacy requires authenticity, and authenticity cannot breathe in an environment where you are afraid to say no. Eastern philosophy teaches that balance must be preserved in all things. Without balance, chaos arises. In relationships, boundaries are the balancing force. They define where you end and the other begins. They allow love to be exchanged, not consumed. They create a sacred space in which both individuals can thrive without overstepping into each other's emotional terrain. But boundaries do not need to be aggressive. They are not ultimatums. They are not rules. They are inner agreements that say, this is what honors my well-being. This is how I remain in integrity with myself. When you understand this, boundaries become less about pushing others away and more about protecting what is sacred within. There was once a woman named Ela. She was soft-spoken, kind, deeply empathetic. She had always been told that she was too nice, that she let people walk all over her. In truth, she found it easier to say yes than to deal with the discomfort of conflict. In her relationship, this pattern continued. Her partner would cancel plans last minute, make jokes about her family, flirt with others in her presence, and when she brought it up, he would say she was overreacting. So she stopped bringing it up. She told herself it was not worth the argument. But over time, something shifted. Not in him, but in her. Her body grew tired. Her laughter became less frequent. Her inner world began to feel distant, as if she was living in someone else's life. And one evening, while sitting quietly alone, she heard a thought she had never allowed before. I don't feel safe here. That night, she didn't yell. She didn't make a dramatic exit. She simply began to return to herself. She began to remember that peace is not found by enduring discomfort. It is found by honoring it. A boundary is not something you announce once in anger. It is something you embody consistently in presence. You do not need to scream to be heard. You need to speak with clarity, with calm, with conviction, and you must be willing to follow through, not as punishment, but as self-preservation. The nervous system is deeply involved in the setting and enforcement of boundaries. When a boundary is crossed, the body reacts, sometimes subtly, sometimes loudly. You may feel tension in your throat, a tightness in your chest, or a sudden fatigue. These are not random reactions. They are physiological signals that something in your environment is not supportive of your inner stability. In such moments, your task is not to suppress the sensation. It is to pause and listen. Modern psychology refers to co-regulation, the way two nervous systems respond and adapt to each other in intimate connection. In a healthy relationship, partners regulate each other through attunement, support, and safety. But when boundaries are absent, co-regulation becomes dysregulation. Instead of calming each other, partners trigger one another, creating cycles of confusion, anxiety, and mistrust. When a man disregards your boundaries, it is not only a behavioral issue, it is a nervous system issue. It creates a physiological environment of chronic stress, which in time affects your mental clarity, emotional resilience, and even physical health. This is why certain relationships feel exhausting, even when nothing dramatic is happening. Because your body is constantly managing threat, trying to protect you from the next hurtful comment, the next dismissive glance, the next unpredictable outburst. In such an environment, the mind starts rationalizing. He's just going through something. He didn't mean it like that. He has a good heart. But the body remains unconvinced because the body does not respond to hope. It responds to history. And if the history is filled with disregard, the body will remain in defense. It will not relax simply because you want it to. It needs consistency. It needs evidence. This is where boundary clarity becomes crucial. You must become so familiar with your own values, needs, and limits that you no longer negotiate them for temporary comfort. When a man mocks your vulnerability and calls it weakness, when he pushes past your no with humor or pressure, when he repeatedly crosses lines you've clearly expressed, it is not time for a deeper explanation. It is time for a deeper alignment with yourself. There is power in quiet decisions. You do not need to fight. you do not need to convince, you need to choose. Choose not from fear or anger, but from remembrance. The remembrance of who you are before you were told you had to tolerate discomfort to be loved. Boundaries also require inner discipline. They are not maintained through mood, but through mastery. There may be moments when you are tempted to make exceptions. When you tell yourself, just this once, because you fear being alone. But every time you make an exception that violates your well-being, you reinforce the belief that your peace is negotiable. And the longer you allow that pattern, the harder it becomes to return to yourself. Discipline is not about harshness. It is about devotion. Devotion to your inner harmony, to the life you are building, to the vision you hold of love as a space where you can be fully seen, not selectively accepted. When you are devoted to this, boundaries become less about rejection and more about resonance. You begin to attract those who respect your clarity, not resent it. There is a saying, if someone gets upset when you set a boundary, that's confirmation the boundary was needed. Healthy men are not afraid of boundaries. They are grateful for them. Because boundaries show you have a relationship with yourself, and a person who respects you wants to honor that relationship, not override it. In the earliest stages of romance, it is easy to overlook subtle oversteps. You might call them quirks. You might say, he's just being playful. But how someone responds to your first few no's reveals everything. If your discomfort is met with defensiveness, if your requests are met with deflection, pay attention. That is not love. That is resistance. And resistance often hides a deeper fear, not of losing you, but of being held accountable to your standards. To create lasting harmony, you must become unwavering in your standards, not rigid, but rooted. Rooted in the knowing that love is not about merging into one another. It is about meeting over and over again as two whole beings who bring their fullness into the space between them. Boundaries protect that space. They preserve the sacredness of what is being built. There once was a couple who had been together for many years. On the surface, everything looked fine. They had stability, shared routines, a sense of familiarity. But underneath, the woman had long stopped expressing her needs. Her partner would make decisions without her, joke about her in front of others, dismiss her concerns as overthinking. And though she never confronted him, she grew more distant with each passing year. One day, during a walk, he asked why she no longer looked at him the way she used to. Her answer was quiet. Because you never listened when I did. That moment was not a dramatic explosion. It was the slow unveiling of years of boundaryless connection, of affection built on silence, of presence without protection. Boundaries are not loud, they are steady. They do not require a justification. They require awareness. And when set with clarity, they begin to rewire not only your relationships, but your entire sense of self. You begin to realize that your value is not dependent on how much you endure. It is reflected in how much you honor your own energy. The most profound relationships are not those without conflict, but those where conflict does not threaten connection. And this is only possible when boundaries are clear, consistent, and respected. When you can say, that doesn't feel good, and the other responds not with defense, but with presence. When your emotions are not problems to solve, but windows into your inner world. When you feel safe, not just in his arms, but in his words, in his gaze, in his attention. To get there, you must begin here, with yourself. Sit in stillness. Listen to your body. What have you been tolerating? What have you been excusing? What have you been calling love that feels more like pressure? Begin to name it, not to fight it, but to free yourself from it. Begin to speak, not to change another, but to return to truth. Begin to act, not from fear, but from alignment. And if he leaves when you begin to honor your boundaries, then let him. Let him walk away from the version of you that no longer needs to be small to be loved. Because the one who is meant to walk beside you will never be threatened by your truth. He will be drawn to it. He will recognize it as strength, and he will meet you there, not just in moments of ease, but in moments of challenge, not with control, but with care, not with power, but with partnership. This is what it means to live with boundary clarity, to no longer confuse love with toleration, to no longer accept emotional erosion as connection, to stand fully in your inner authority, and to allow only those who honor that space to remain within it. Not because you are unkind, but because you are finally kind enough to yourself. A single word can open the heart. A single word can close it. What a man chooses to say in moments of tension, of truth, of intimacy. These words do not simply pass through the air, they leave impressions, not just in the mind, but in the nervous system, in the emotional memory, in the subtle body that stores every moment we allow ourselves to feel deeply. Words are not just sounds, they are energy. They carry intention, clarity, confusion, fear, or love. And while it's easy to believe that what is said matters less than what is meant in relationships, this is not always true. Because the words we hear shape the way we think, the way we perceive, the way we respond. Over time, they become the invisible architecture of our connection to another person. In the quiet moments between people, moments where vulnerability meets presence, language matters more than ever. There are certain words, once spoken, that never leave. They may be forgiven, but they remain. Sometimes because of their sharpness, sometimes because of the moment they were spoken, sometimes because they echoed the very fear we were holding deep inside. And so, when a man chooses words that distort, confuse, blame, or control, he is not merely expressing himself. He is constructing a landscape in which love cannot breathe. The difference between emotional intimacy and emotional manipulation often lies in the subtlety of language. Take, for example, the sentence, "You're lucky I even put up with this." On its surface, it may seem like a moment of frustration. But if you examine it closely, you will see it is not a reflection of the situation. It is a statement of hierarchy. It implies that the woman is somehow a burden, that her presence is conditional, that her value is dependent on someone else's tolerance. And when such phrases are repeated, especially during times when a woman is expressing pain or requesting change, they do more than wound. They reshape. A reshaped self is one that no longer recognizes its original light. It begins to ask, am I asking for too much? Am I really that difficult? Is love supposed to feel like this? But these questions are not born from awareness. They are born from erosion. Because when language is consistently used to create doubt, the person receiving it begins to question not just the relationship, but their very right to have needs. A woman who is told repeatedly, "You're overreacting," eventually stops reacting, not because the pain is gone, but because the message has been internalized. Your feelings are a threat to the peace of this relationship. And so she quiets herself. She edits her speech. She learns to perform emotional restraint, not from mastery, but from survival. And perhaps to those on the outside, she looks calm, composed, low maintenance. But inside, there is a war being fought. A war between the self that knows something is wrong and the self that has been taught to be quiet. The words a man chooses tell you more about his emotional depth than his declarations of love. Anyone can say, "I love you," but not everyone can say, "Tell me what you're feeling. I want to understand." Love is not confirmed in high moments, in passion, in excitement. It is revealed in the face of discomfort. It is revealed in the words chosen when disagreement arises. when needs are expressed, when one person is triggered and the other is asked to hold space. Consider a moment when a woman says, "I don't feel seen." It is a vulnerable sentence, an invitation into her inner world. A man grounded in presence and care will respond, "I didn't know you felt that way. Can you help me understand?" A man operating from fear or defensiveness might say, "You always make everything about you." Both sentences are responses, but only one opens the heart. The other, no matter how calmly delivered, begins to close it. A closed heart does not slam shut, it withdraws slowly. It stops sharing small joys. It stops initiating touch. It begins to feel more like a guest in its own home. And though the person may still be physically present, emotionally, they are miles away. And so, it's not always an argument that ends a relationship. Sometimes, it is simply the accumulation of the wrong words at the wrong times, spoken without awareness, without care, without reverence for how delicate the human spirit truly is. Language and tone influence not only emotion but neurochemistry. The brain interprets certain words as threats and others as safety cues. Harsh or belittling speech can activate the amygdala, the brain's fear center, triggering a cascade of stress hormones, tightening muscles, raising heart rate, impairing digestion, and suppressing immune function. On the other hand, words of understanding and softness activate the prefrontal cortex, enhancing connection, trust, and emotional regulation. This is not a theory, it is measurable, it is real. The words spoken in your most intimate moments are literally altering your brain and body. Now ask yourself, what kind of emotional world are you building, word by word? Are you surrounded by language that lifts you, that welcomes your truth, that softens your nervous system? Or are you slowly becoming numb, physically fatigued, emotionally disoriented, because the words spoken to you are always conditional, confusing, or crushing? There is a saying in Zen tradition, mind your words, they are seeds. And in relationships, every phrase planted eventually grows, sometimes into connection, sometimes into silence, sometimes into a quiet ache that does not scream but lingers. A woman once told her partner, "When you interrupt me, I feel invisible." His reply, "You're always playing the victim." She didn't say anything back. She simply folded the part of her that wanted to be seen, placed it deep within, and continued the conversation like nothing happened. But something did happen, a small fracture. And the more such moments accumulated, the more she disappeared. Not by leaving, but by no longer offering her truth. Another woman, when expressing her discomfort about a flirtatious interaction she witnessed, was told, "You're insecure. That's your problem, not mine." He believed he was being honest. But honesty without empathy is aggression in disguise. It's not the truth that wounds, it's the way it's delivered. Real truth is never used as a weapon. It is never dropped like a stone in the middle of a fragile moment. It is offered with care, with timing, with sensitivity. The man who uses honesty to blame, to shame, or to escape accountability is not being transparent. He is being defensive. There is a difference between speaking clearly and speaking carelessly. The former creates intimacy. The latter creates injury. In the space between people, intention alone is not enough. Action must follow. And in that action, the smallest habits of communication matter. What does he say when you're struggling? What does he say when you're silent? What does he say when you succeed? Is he building connection or control? Is he holding you with language or piercing you with it? Words have frequency. The ancient traditions knew this long before science confirmed it. When you are exposed to high-frequency language, gratitude, compassion, encouragement, your cells respond, your heart rate stabilizes, your immune system strengthens. When you are surrounded by low-frequency language, sarcasm, criticism, threat, Your body goes into defense. Your breath shortens. Your digestion slows. Your ability to think clearly diminishes. This is why the tone of a home affects not just mood, but health. A house filled with contempt slowly sickens the spirit. A house filled with tenderness heals it. But this also means that you have a choice. You may not control another's speech, but you can decide what kind of language you allow into your space, into your mind, into your memory. And that choice determines the quality of your life. If the words you hear regularly cause confusion, diminish your joy, or make you feel unsafe, it is not overreacting to speak up. It is not weakness to walk away. It is wisdom. Not every relationship is meant to be corrected. Some are meant to be seen clearly, so you can correct your path. And the moment you begin to prioritize the language of peace, of presence, of truth, you will no longer be able to tolerate the language of chaos. Not because you're angry, but because you are finally calm enough to notice the difference. And what about those moments when nothing is said at all? When silence replaces conversation and the things that need to be named are avoided? That too is a kind of speech. Absence speaks. Avoidance speaks. The refusal to say, "I'm sorry," to say, "I hear you," to say, "I was wrong." These are not passive choices. They are active statements, and they shape the emotional reality of the relationship as much as any word spoken. A woman once sat across from her partner after a difficult day. She didn't need solutions. She needed presence. She shared how she felt exhausted, overwhelmed, unnoticed. He looked at her, exhaled deeply, and said, "You're too much." That sentence followed her for years. Not because it was uniquely cruel, but because it was spoken at a moment when she was most unguarded. And the mind, in such moments, records the message more deeply. It files it under truth, even when it's just someone else's discomfort. The emotional depth of a relationship is not measured by the big declarations. It is measured in those small, unscripted moments when one person reaches for the other and what they find in return. Do they find understanding? Or do they find judgment? Do they find softness? Or do they find hardness? The answer lies in the language exchanged in those moments. The man who builds connection uses language like a bridge. He invites, he listens, he adjusts. He does not weaponize your pain. He does not turn your feelings into liabilities. He does not compete to be right. He meets you where you are and helps you rise gently. The man who cannot meet you there, who uses words to dominate, confuse, or dismiss, will often blame you for the distance he creates. He will say, "You're too sensitive." When you express hurt, he will say, "You're imagining things." When you ask for clarity, and if you stay long enough, you will begin to believe that love is supposed to feel like doubt, but it's not. Love, when aligned with respect and awareness, feels like breath. It feels like warmth. It feels like the kind of quiet that heals, not the kind that isolates. And that feeling is created, sustained, and protected by words. The right words, spoken in the right tone, at the right time, have the power to nourish a heart for years. And the wrong words, repeated often enough, have the power to starve it. This is not about perfection. All of us say things in moments of reactivity that we later regret. What matters is not flawlessness. What matters is accountability. When someone hurts you with their words, do they own it? Do they reflect? Do they change? Or do they deny, deflect, defend? That difference is everything. Because ultimately it is not the mistake that defines a relationship. It is the repair. And repair is only possible when both people are fluent in the language of humility, of compassion, of self-awareness. If that language is absent, no amount of attraction or history will compensate for what is missing. And so, listen closely, not just to what is being said, but to what is not, to how you feel before, during, and after conversations. to the way your body responds when you hear his voice, to the thoughts that arise after every interaction. Your body remembers what your mind tries to forget. And if you ever find yourself asking, did I really hear what I think I heard? Am I making this a bigger deal than it is? Pause. Breathe and ask yourself a deeper question. Would I want my daughter, my sister, my younger self to be spoken to this way? If the answer is no, then you already know. The language you allow into your life is the environment you are choosing to live in. Make sure it's a place where you can breathe, where you can grow, where you can rest. And if it's not, you are not bound to stay. You are allowed to choose different words, a different tone, a different story. You are allowed to speak love into existence, not the kind that asks you to stay small, but the kind that calls you back to your full height, where your voice is not only heard, but valued, where your heart is not only held, but honored, where your presence is not only accepted, but cherished, where language is not a battlefield, but a bridge, where words are not weapons, but water, where every sentence spoken becomes an act of care, where you remember, word by word, who you are. When someone shows you who they are through their words, believe them. Not in the fleeting heat of emotion, but in the patterns repeated when the mask slips, when vulnerability is met with dismissal, when love becomes a negotiation of your boundaries rather than a celebration of your being. Words are not just spoken. They are invitations or warnings, anchors or knives, bridges or barriers. In every relationship, what is said and what is allowed to be said shapes the future in silence. You are not difficult for wanting clarity. You are not demanding for needing respect. You are not too much for desiring love that feels safe, present, and real. Every time you tolerate language that diminishes you, you chip away at the foundation of your own self-respect. But every time you walk away from what dishonors you, even if your voice trembles and your knees are weak, you return to the sacred ground of self-worth. The way someone speaks to you in moments of discomfort reveals everything. And when you stop justifying, excusing, or explaining the violence hidden in words that seem casual or normal, you open space for something far more extraordinary, something that does not require you to shrink, something that does not demand your silence in exchange for affection, something that does not weaponize your sensitivity, but instead honors it as the gateway to deeper connection. Walk away not in anger, but in peace, not with bitterness, but with clarity. You are not leaving behind something essential. You are stepping into the space where your soul can finally breathe. And in that breath, in that stillness, in that return to self, you will remember love was never supposed to feel like confusion. Love, in its highest form, feels like home. And home is a place where words heal, not harm, where language lifts, not wounds, where silence is comfort, not punishment, where you no longer have to explain why respect is not optional. You deserve that, not someday, now.